I'm Jonathan Hemp. This is a recording of a talk I gave to the Cape Bird Club on the 14th of July. The talk is about the Makuleke region, also known as the Pufuri Triangle, in the far north of Kruger National Park. It is remarkable in that it is situated between two great rivers, the Limpopo, which is an ancient and dying river, 65 million years ago had its origins in the highlands of Angola. And to the south is the Luvuvu River, which is a young and powerful river, actively carving through the sandstones of the area. It is at the meeting point of three countries. It obviously is within South Africa, but to the north is Zimbabwe, and to the east is Mozambique. The three boundaries meet at Crook's Corner in the far east of the Makuleke. It has a notable ecological diversity. It features several Ramsar wetlands. It has a rich history and folklore. There's evidence of millennia of geological upheaval, and the social upheaval is very interesting. It also offers arguably the best birding in Kruger National Park. So here is the Makuleke. One can see it marked there, with the Limpopo River to the north and the Luvuvu River forming the southern boundary. And one can see the boundaries, the national boundaries there with Zimbabwe and Mozambique. The topography of the area, or rather the vegetation groupings, is mainly bushveld. The grey area here is Limpopo Ridge bushveld, whereas the pinker large area is Makuleke sandveld. It offers some Mopani. The green area in the middle is quite mature Mopani, whereas the reddish area to the left of the picture is more conventional Mopani woodland. The brown areas are riverine forest, following both the Limpopo River and the Pufuri and the Luvuvu River. The purple area is the floodplains because both of these rivers frequently flood. The area is also much drier than further south. It has an annual average rainfall of 250 millimeters versus 600 millimeters in Punda Maria to the south. This map shows the topography of the area. The higher altitude areas in brown, and the green, of course, is the low-lying areas next to the rivers. In this talk, I'm going to first talk about my wife and my personal journey. Margie has shared in all of our birdwatching adventures. I'll then talk a little bit about the people's history, the site of Tulamela, a forgotten tribe, and the Makuleke tribe, and then talk about the colonial history, the Ivory Trail. Obviously, habitats and birds will feature large. And finally, I'd just like to talk about some of the accommodation options. The top 10 special birds in the region I've listed here. We were lucky enough to see all of these. There are perhaps others that someone might add. And we were lucky enough to get photographs of most of them. I'm not going to cover them immediately, but through the talk we will certainly try and mention and show photographs of all of these. Our first visit to the region was in 1991. We joined the Cape Bird Club in the late 1980s, and in 1991 attended a course by Monty Brett, who came down from Johannesburg to run a very intensive birdwatching course in Cape Town. It operated over 2 weekends and a week intervening, and we had to learn, I think it was about 90 bird calls in that time. Shortly afterwards, we learnt that Monty was offering a long weekend in the Punda Maria region and opted to go up and join him on that. It really was a very intensive learning experience for us. Our bird lists were very meager when we started that. The highlight of that trip was a visit to Pufuri picnic site, which many of you will know. It's a wonderful place to pause, get out of your car. It has wonderful birding, and you can have a meal or a tea break. The guides there were wonderful. Frank Mabasa was the guide, the camp manager at the time, and he was so instructive in what he could tell us about the birds. He is sadly no longer with us, but in a recent visit we met Mandla Ngomani, who's now the camp manager, and he likewise has an immense knowledge of birds and is always obliging to find ones. During the space of probably 15 minutes, we had a bird party come through at Pafuri picnic site, and we counted 15 lifers in that period, birds that we'd never seen before, obviously starting from a low base. But among the notable ones were this wonderful little black-throated wattle-eye, southern yellow white-eye, often to be seen high up in the trees, difficult to spot high up there. The black-back puffback, of which we'd learnt the call from Monty's course, but it was lovely to see them with a piercing red eye. The tropical boo-boo is very similar to our southern boo-boo, but here it's on the southern limit of its range and is not seen elsewhere in southern Africa, in South Africa. We also found Retz's helmet shrike, which Frank called in with a whistled call, and it's still a special bird for us. Just such a remarkable looking bird with that red eye ring. Our next visit was 16 years later, when in September 2007 we were invited by friends that we'd actually met at that Punda Maria weekend way back in 1991, and they invited us to join them on the Nyala Land Wilderness Trail. The trail is arguably named after both the Nyala tree, also known as the Mashatu, and the Nyala antelope, which is particularly found in the northern part of Kruger. The Trails Camp is situated well away from the normal roads that the public can access, deep in the bush. And even though it's fenced, one has a sense that you are in wild country. There is a large baobab on the boundary of the camp, which boasts mottled spinetails nesting. Sadly, we didn't get many good views of these birds. They were usually came at dusk and at dawn and were very quick in their flights. We had two guides on this trip. Stephen Midzi was a young Zimbabwean. Dreadlocks, wonderful sense of humor, but a deep knowledge. He was busy doing his master's degree in lion behavior. And his exuberance was in a way offset or balanced by David Nyani Namakulu, an older man, a vender, very, very wise, who spent most of his life in the bush. We had one particularly poignant encounter on a walk. At this time, a lot of Zimbabwean refugees were seeking to come to South Africa, crossing Kruger Park illegally. We encountered a group of these young Zimbabweans, barefoot, hungry, on this walk. We gave them all the food we had, our lunch packs. Stephen was obliged, because of being a ranger, he was obliged to report them to the authorities. But he left it for a couple of days, hoping that they would get clear before he did so. Using the Trails Camp as a base, we would go out on walks every day. But the highlight of these walks was a trip down Lana Gorge. Lana Gorge is one of the special places in Africa. 11 kilometers long, 150 meters deep. The Luvuvu River has carved its path through the sandstones, reaching the bedrock of Permian sandstone, which was in fact laid down 250 million years ago. At that time, Africa did not exist as a separate continent. As can be seen here, that our continents, before tectonic movements separated them, consisted of a supercontinent known as Pangaea. So here we are, about to set off on our walk through this magnificent Lana Gorge. We spent the better part of that day going out and back along the major part of the Lana Gorge. And what an amazing privilege it was to wade barefoot along a crocodile-infested river in the heart of a Big Five reserve. Very reassuring to have our two very capable guides with us. We had encountered, I think it was 7 different raptor species along the walk, but the highlight was definitely this sighting of a Pell's fishing owl in the heart of the gorge. I had just acquired a 400mm lens for my Nikon camera and was still learning to use it, so fumbled a bit in trying to take these photographs. Fortunately, thanks to shooting in RAW, which enabled us to balance the photo somewhat, and the use of autofocus and not too many intervening branches, managed to get these images. And it was only in processing them that we saw that, in fact, the owl was carrying a fish in its talons. Among the other raptor species are Vera's eagle, black eagles, probably the only place in Kruger where one can see these magnificent birds. Pairs of hawk eagle were fairly common in that area, as were African harrier hawks, gymnogenes. Our next visit to the region was in November 2019, some 12 years after our wilderness trail. Margie and I were lucky enough to spend 4 days staying at the Pafuri Tented Camp, a luxury camp on the banks of the Luvuvu River. Originally established by wilderness safaris, the camp was extensively damaged when the Luvuvu River came down in flood in 2013, but it has been magnificently rebuilt by Return Africa. During that stay there, we were delighted to spend time with Andile Mabunda, our guide, mentor, and just such a wonderful depth of knowledge of the area, and a wonderful knowledge of birds too. Andile is from the Makuleke tribe, and it was really special to get his insights into the history of the region and of his tribe. During one of the walks with him, he took us to the site of one of the Makuleke villages that had been built there. In November 2020, during the depths of the COVID epidemic, and in November 2021, Margie and I were very privileged to stay and to compete in Birding Big Day at the Eco Training Camp in the heart of the Makuleke Park. There we were capably looked after by Ross Hawkins, another wonderfully knowledgeable man with an immense knowledge of birds and of an immense knowledge of bushcraft. During 2021, our Birding Big Day group we formed with Mark Liptrot and Cecily Salmon, who were on the trip with us. We hadn't met them previously. And we managed to have a count of 195 birds. Here's a track of our bird lasso record on the 26th of November. Margie, to her credit, managed to master bird lasso almost on the trot as we were preparing for the day. We also visited Lana Gorge and saw Lana Gorge from a totally different perspective from the top. And I think the delight on our faces at the time just expresses how nice it was to see it again. Our sighting of the day, though, was a little elephant shrew that had been running around just beneath where we were sitting, viewing the gorge. Phylogenetics, strangely, places it closer to elephants than to the true shrews. But the Sengi name seems more appropriate, which was suggested by Jonathan Kingdon, the well-known zoologist and author. Now I'd like to move on to some of the history of the region. One of the notable sites in the area is Tulamela, which lies on a cliff overlooking the Luvuvu River on the Sandpark side of the park. An ancient site. It was occupied by 2,000 to 3,000 people between the years of 1250 and 1700. It is believed the people were from the Makahani subtribe, subtribe, a Shona ethnic group from Zimbabwe, and the forefathers of the Venda. The walls at Thulamela have been rebuilt extensively with an aid of a grant from Goldfields. Some 2,000 tons of rock were handled during this process. And stonemasons were trained to do this work. They had strict instructions to rebuild the walls only from the debris to be found immediately at the site of that wall. They were not allowed to bring in other stones from elsewhere. And thus they attempted, and I think have succeeded, in really recreating Thulamela as it must once have looked. Thulamela seems to have been the latest of the three large historical walled kingdoms found in southern Africa. The first one occupied was at Mapungubwe, and history dates it back to 1075. And the Makahani subtribe at the time moved on to Great Zimbabwe between 1200 and 1400, and then down to Thulamela, which operated until 1700, it's estimated. There is strong evidence in all of these sites of Arab trade, glass beads, Chinese porcelain, imported textiles, ivory bracelets, gold, bronze, and other jewelry have all been found. And it's likely that ivory was extracted. And it seems as though the Limpopo River might have provided the trade route for the access of this. We've often wished we could learn more about these early Arab trades. There seems to be very little influence, and yet they had a great influence on the development of East Africa and this part of Africa. The Makuleke people were Tsonga speaking. They fled Zulu oppression in Mozambique and arrived in the 1820s in the region, seizing an ivory trade center from a Venda chief. Their economy was well organized, based on both agriculture and hunting, and they looked after their environment. Education came to them when a primary school was established in the 1880s by Swiss missionaries. However, the National Parks Board at that time was busy consolidating Kruger National Park. And from 1931, there were repeated attempts to annex the Makuleke land to incorporate it into Kruger. It was finally in 1969 that the Makuleke tribe were uprooted and transported to Ntlhaveni, outside where the park boundaries are, without any consultation and without compensation. But, remarkably, in 1996, in South Africa's first successful land claim, the Makuleke Contractual Park came into being. It was not without some stress. The Makuleke people had not learned to trust white people. And it was the intervention of a journalist called Eddie Koch, who had been trying to highlight and expose the injustice done to the Makuleke. And it was his intervention that inevitably led to the successful negotiation of an agreement. In terms of the agreement, ownership and title of that portion were restored to the Makuleke people. And in turn, they guaranteed to use the land for protection of wildlife, with no farming nor mining to be permitted. And I think it's to their great credit that they opted to do this. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude. So many of these land claims do not succeed in preserving the natural wildlife. There is a joint management. They have full rights to commercialize their land, and in fact have appointed sandparks to manage the park as a whole. And there are concessions given to the accommodation establishments, which we'll talk about. There's a joint management board, which includes the sandparks people, working to a master plan and ensuring that the deed of grant is complied with. And on top of it, the Makuleke people have to be given preference in employment within the park and have to be trained to take over conservation. They are a wonderful people. These are some of the staff from Pafuri Tented Camp. And they still maintain a lot of their traditions. A different history exists with the Ivory Trail, which operated in the early 1900s, largely to export ivory, to poach ivory, to hunt wild game. At that stage, Kruger was rather restricting hunting in that area, but the wild game was still free and available in that northern part, which, as you can see, was not part of Kruger then. The trail also served to channel labor for the gold mines on the Witwatersrand from Mozambique. And there were a number of people called blackbirders in the early days who used to indulge in this trade and take advantage of the need. This trail, as one can see in this map, led right up to Sofala in Mozambique. And again, one believes it's inevitable that the Arabs were involved in this trade, both of mine workers and of the ivory. There is a fascinating book about the Ivory Trail written by T.V. Bulpin. It tells the life story of one Cecil Barnard, known as Vikenya, he who swaggers while he walks, who turned his hand after a failure of farming. He was born in 1886, turned his hand to hunting, to ivory trading, to poaching, to blackbirding. In other words, trading in recruiting black mine workers from Mozambique. And was a local do-gooder as well. This cover as shown here is from the 1954 edition, a copy of which was given to my brother Angus as a young man. There are many fascinating tales told of Vikenya and his exploits in the region. One view is that he shot hundreds of elephants, and one view is that he targeted only the older ones, recognized by their dung. The story also goes that he was obsessed with shooting Dulamiti, an exceptional bull, but when he finally had him in his sights, could not do it. He laid down his rifle and devoted most of the rest of his life to conservation. A grave for him was dug by Shangaan warriors at one stage, when he was lying near death due to malaria. But he's actually buried in Vlakplaas in the Northwest Province. His son, Isak, erected this memorial to Vikenya. Isak Barnard's story, many of you might have heard of him. He is regarded as almost the pioneer of 4x4 safaris in southern Africa, established the company Penduka Safaris, concentrated a lot on Kgalagadi and that. Isak, the son, shoots only with a camera. He was given his first Canon in the 1970s by Japanese clients, and actually has some of his photographs of Bushmen exhibited at the Smithsonian Institute. You will recall that part of the Ivory Trail passed through the present site of Punda Maria, and on a hill, the hill of Punda Maria, a police station was established in the 1930s to try and instill some law and order on the largely illegal trades that took place. This police station has now been converted and is known as Russell Cottage. There was a grant from the Russell family to enable it, and it really is available as accommodation from Punda Maria Camp in Sandparks. Also on that path, those of you who've driven between Punda Maria and Pufuri will have noted Baobab Hill. A prominent baobab marks the site. And this was the site of an outspan where, traveling with recruited mine workers who largely walked that area, they were outspanned there on a camp. And oxen were also outspanned that were used in the trade routes. The plaque there commemorates one Paul Neergaard, who was an official of Wenela, the Western Native Labour Association, who tried to formalize the recruitment of black mine workers. The birders among you will have heard of Neergaard's sunbird, and I don't think it's entirely appropriately named, but Neergaard was given this honor after he helped the ornithologist C.H.B. Grant with a permit to access Mozambique, where he found this bird. Neergaard's sunbird is not found in Kruger. Wenela operated a recruitment station at the current Pafuri border post, where the road from Pafuri goes into Mozambique. These buildings have now been converted into accommodation as well, now called Mockford House and Mockford Cottage and the Doctor's Cottage. We now look at Crook's Corner, arguably the best known part of the Makuleke region, where the Luvuvu River has a confluence with the Limpopo. In our experience, the Limpopo is one giant sandpit, and whereas the Luvuvu is flowing reasonably strongly most of the year. It's reported that in 1950, a Zambezi shark was caught at the confluence, which must indicate that the river, the Limpopo River, had much more water in it, because the shark could only have swum up from the Indian Ocean. This is a view from the Sandpark side of the confluence. The water there's a parking area where you can get out of your car and observe that. The water there is entirely from the Luvuvu River. And this is, we revisited this with Ross Hawkins from Eco Training last year. And you can see there's still more water, but all from the Luvuvu. Once again, the Limpopo was dry. The Luvuvu boasts a large number of very large crocodiles at that confluence. Nearby, near Crook's Corner, are some floodplains with lala palms growing on the floodplains. And it's there that we encountered probably our greatest find, or the rarest bird we encountered there, this lemon-breasted canary. The lemon-breasted canary, its nests are both in and of lala palms. They're situated there and they use lala palms. And they're really only to be found in this eastern part of Kruger. They do also occur apparently at Bonamanzi. This is supposed to be a birding talk, so I'd better get on and concentrate on more of the birds. The Eco Training Camp provides a wonderful place to do some gentle birding. Among the birds we saw there were these striking green-winged petilia, little red-billed firefinches, gin-spot batis, aramark babblers, their noisy chatterers, the white-browed robin-chat, used to be called huglins, and a favourite bird of Margie's and mine. When we lived in Rwanda for a year, and every morning we were woken up by the wonderful call of the white-browed robin-chat. Another robin-chat, which was a first for us, was the white-throated robin-chat that we saw on our last trip there. Little bee-eaters are also to be found, and a real special that we found was the burnt-necked aramomula. Tawny-flanked premier, perhaps a little bit more common, and long-billed crombec, a nice bird to see. We were lucky in camp to have an African scops owl with its little cricket-like call, and both crested barbets and the black-collared barbet were to be found in camp, as well as these gentle emerald-spotted wood doves. Luvuvu River provides another excellent habitat for birds. And there's no better place to watch birds there than on the Pafuri Bridge, where anyone can get out of their vehicles between the marked spots at any time. We were especially privileged in that we could visit it after the public had all gone home, so we had the place to ourselves. And it's a wonderful place to have sundowners. If you're lucky, Pell's fishing owl is certainly to be found in the trees fringing the river, close to the bridge. And if you're especially lucky, you might spot an African finfoot, probably more common on the Sabi River, but with multiple viewpoints along the Luvuvu, you might be lucky and see this very attractive finfoot. But our special sighting that we had from the Lavuvu Bridge was of Boehm's spine-tail. And it was wonderful. We must thank Richard Flack for these photographs and for the patient guidance of Ross Hawkins, who we could identify these birds. They are almost always to be seen in a flock of other birds. They fly, they look almost tailless, like a little bat, fly with short glides, rapid bursts of flapping. And often they're with little swifts and other swallows and swifts. I'd never really known why they were called spine-tails, but these photographs of Richard Flack's just highlight it. Quite amazing to see these little spine-like features on the tail. When we were there in 2020, the river was fairly low. These shots taken of the Pafuri Bridge from within the Makuleke. And then in 2021, there was a lot more water flowing. And in fact, 2019 and 2020 years were quite drought years in the Makuleke region. Along the river, white-fronted bee-eater are to be found, as are black-crowned night herons. The white-crowned lapwing is found only on very few rivers in Kruger. In fact, it's found on the Olifant, Sasabi, and then on the Limpopo and the Lavuvu, and virtually nowhere else. It's a nice bird to see. Saddle-billed storks are often to be seen, as are a greenback heron, now the striated herons, and giant kingfishers. This is the female with her gorgeous chestnut-coloured apron. The male has a chestnut-coloured waistcoat. And of course, the elephants like to use the Lavuvu riverbed as a roadway. Most of that area, as was shown in the vegetation map, consists of mixed sandfelt woodland, and there are several birds to be found in that area. Baobabs are sprinkled among the occasional acacias and mapanis. A really special bird of that dry area are three-banded coursers. It's really an uncommon resident, probably only to be found in this region in South Africa. And you'd be lucky to find it other than at night, and even luckier to find it at night. Also, another uncommon resident and difficult to see in daylight is the bronze-winged courser. Pretty special bird to find. The only sandgrass in Kruger National Park are these double-banded. One often sees them on the roadside. They prefer mapani woodland. And unlike the other sandgrass, they drink at dusk. Most of the other sandgrass tend to drink it in the mornings, 10 or 11 o'clock. And we never tire of seeing these punk rockers of guinea fowl, these crested guinea fowl. And there are a couple of them that seem to be resident in Punda Maria camp, so it's a good place to look for them. One of the birds you're most likely to hear in the Makuleke region are these red-crested korans, and I hope you can hear the call. Wonderful to see it while it's calling as well, the head movements bobbing up and down, and occasionally the crest gets unfurled, which one doesn't often see. Also to be found are crested francolin, usually in groups in the bushier areas. And we were very lucky to see this European nightjar, which Andili from Pafuri Tented Camp found for us. Almost always to be found roosting on tree branches, unlike other nightjars. We also never tire of seeing these white-crested helmet shrikes seen in groups, and they always have to have a naughty, sort of cheeky expression on their faces. We saw several ground hornbill, and it was nice to see these because they have been reported as being threatened in some of their habitat. and a visiting intra-African migrant, the Jacobin cuckoo. Often worth pausing for are the lilac-breasted rollers, fairly common, but always such a beautiful sight. And the rarer visiting European roller, similar, but a nice one to see. We also had both the chagras, the black crown chagra and the brown crown chagra, sighted both in the bushveld region. And always like the cinnamon-breasted buntings, just such a contrast, or similar to our Cape buntings, but with that lovely warm cinnamon chest. We also had a sighting of this martial eagle next to the road. Quite unusual. It was on a kill, a small bushbuck, it appears. And it was so intent on keeping its prey that it hardly moved off, tended to try and ignore us. The white flash is unusual. It's not a vestigial tag, but it's probably just feathers displaced, maybe while it was making this kill. We also had a juvenile martial eagle, and if you remember that slide of bird lasser, there was a martial eagle noted on that, and I think it was this bird. But among the raptors, the striking batelier is definitely one of my favorites. When I was a young Boy Scout, I was posted to batelier patrol, and I didn't have the remotest clue what a batelier was, although I did learn what it was. We also saw nesting Wahlberg's eagles, one of the resident big brown jobs, as they're called. And the sightings of a white-headed vulture, which is unusual. It's a threatened, quite rare species now, this one with a full crop. On the other end of the size scale is the little pearl-spotted owlet. And if you can imitate its call, it's amazing what consternation it causes among birds. They certainly are fearsome little bird hunters. Buffalo are fairly well represented there. There are a number of herds, and we were lucky to see this yellow-billed oxpecker reintroduced some time back to Kruger, and southern red-billed hornbills. Mayor's parrot is really to be found only in the far north of Kruger, we were lucky to see them. They are also found near Mapungubwe, as we'd seen previously. And the striped kingfisher, one of the little smaller kingfishers, not dependent on water, that's a delight to see. As is the migratory European bee-eater. They arrive in very drab plumage and get their breeding plumage by the time they depart in March, April. And the common sunbird there is the white-bellied, always an attractive one, as well as Mariko sunbird. And we're grateful to Warwick Tarberton for this magnificent photograph. The white-browed scrub robin is one that we remember from way back of our Monty Brett's course, and always nice to see character birds. The baobabs and to some extent mature mapani are particular habitat, or are habitat to a particular group of birds. And among these is probably one of the highest prized birds is the racket-tailed roller. Only to be found in this northern part of South Africa. They are difficult to see. They tend to hang out in mid-canopy. They don't perch prominently as the other rollers do, and they're just quiet, but a lovely bird to spot. As are another one of the ticks, the mega ticks, is the Arnott's chat, which we saw this one right next to the main Pafuri Bridge to Pafuri Gate Road, the tarred road. And this is the female. The male has white on the head, and she was very obliging. Also obliging on that same road were a group of red-headed weavers in a baobab, and one could see their straggly nests there. The red-billed buffalo weaver also builds straggly nests in the baobabs, usually on the west side of the trees, because there is a prevailing easterly wind. Mosque swallows are also associated with baobabs, and they frequently nest in tree holes in the baobabs, but also in mud-built ones, generally restricted to the north of Kruger. As are the Meave starling, or the long-tailed starling, which is it's quite rare in South Africa. There are apparently only about 300 birds recorded, but is certainly found across Botswana, Namibia, and Zambia up north. Also nice to see are the purple rollers, again sitting prominently, and the broad-billed roller, both of which nice birds. In fact, the 5 rollers are quite a nice group to tickle. This woodland kingfisher is one of the most memorable birds for me from our first visit with Monty Brett way back in 1991. With its call, which is so redolent of the bushveld. Also nice to see was an orange-breasted bush shrike in a baobab there. And we were lucky to observe a wonderful interaction between a greater honeyguide and an African hoopoe. The greater honeyguide seeking to access the hoopoe's nest to go and lay its egg there, being a parasite and parasitic bird. And the African hoopoe going to great lengths to stop it. And so the hoopoe squarely blocked off the hole to the frustration of the honeyguide. The yellow-billed hornbill also to be seen in contrast to the red-billed. Tropical riverine forests provide another habitat along both sides, along both the Limpopo and the Luvuvu rivers. And on a drive with Andili from Pafuri Tented Camp, we had this wonderful view of a crowned eagle on a branch just over our heads. And what a magnificent bird that is. It really is. Those talons, it's one of I think has the largest talons of an incredible kill record. Also nice to see is the purple-crested turco, the only turco to be found in Kruger. And the African green pigeon, also just often to be found in or it likes frequenting the riverine forests. The greenwood hoopoe, I think better by its previous name, the red-billed hoopoe, is a very noisy bird. It's called Nhlekabafazi by the indigenous name for it, which is the laughter of woman or the cackling of woman. And nice to see also, unusual elsewhere, but nice to see is the yellow-bellied greenbill and the bearded scrub robin. Also tends to hang out in the more forested regions, as do the greater blue-eared starlings. The more common of the parrots there is the brown-headed parrot, found much more widely than mayers. And also another nice bird to see is the grey-headed bush shrike. We had these good views of it, and it has an interesting call. And a trumpety hornbill. Magnificent magnificent bill on it. We will generally have had good views of Barrow's eagle owl, sometimes in pairs, and always a nice bird to see with its pink eyelids. And the owl used to be called the plum-coloured starling, now the violet-backed, quite a spectacular bird, but you'd only recognize the female of that species if you saw it with the male. It's very nondescript. And the scarlet-chested sunbird, usually seen prominently and a wonderful sight, a splash of colour. Burchell's cuckoo, often just heard, but quite commonly seen. And Swainson's spurfowl is the most common of the spurfowls in that region. Yellow-fronted canary, actually in a lala palm, also tends to inhabit the forest fringes. Probably the most spectacular place, though, within Makuleke is the fever tree forest, and the flea there, called reedbuck flea. Not always full. The first time we visited, it was dry, but we had wonderful views of the birds there this time. The fever tree forest there's the location of reedbuck flea, and the fever tree forest exists around there, and it really is such a different habitat. These large, mature fever trees just provide a completely different environment than from one that we're used to. And occasionally there's traffic on the roads, but always nice to see the elephants. We had fairly good bird sightings while we were there. There were yellow-billed and marabou storks there, grey heron, white-faced whistling ducks, and great white pelican, as well as a couple of waders, which we had difficulty seeing, probably greenshanks, plovers. Zebra also to be seen, one of the other of the mammal species to be found, and in the foreground are spur-winged geese and African spoonbill. One of the Ramsar sites is this Makwadzi pan on the floodplains of the Limpopo, and Ross Hawkins set up his scope and managed to spot a flock of collared pratincarl out on the flea. We'd been lucky. We'd stopped over in Letaba on our way up there and had seen these on the sandbanks of the Letaba River, where we took this photograph. There's the location of Makwadzi and the nearby Banyini pan, both of them Ramsar sites on the sort of floodplain of the Limpopo. The nearby Banyini pan, when full, spills right over outside the borders of the park, and we certainly had water in it there. Although Ross Hawkins mentioned just before we contacted him before this talk, and he said it was now dry. But we had also a number of the larger birds there. I think there were some open-billed storks as well as marabou storks and pelicans and whistling ducks there. And grey-headed kingfisher on the fringes. And a non-breeding, one of the Palearctic migrants, uncommon, is the blue-cheeked bee-eater migrant. More common are knobbed ducks, comb ducks, and woolly-necked storks on the fringes, as well as the yellow-billed storks. So finally, I'd just like to mention briefly the accommodation options. The 4 camps that have got a concession from the Makuleke people to operate there are Pafuri Tented Camp, Baobab Hill, both of those managed and run by Return Africa, the Outpost. All 3 of those are fairly upmarket, quite expensive places to stay, but sometimes you get what you pay for. And the Eco Training Camp, which is not quite as upmarket, and is a wonderful place to stay. So there's Pafuri Tented Camp, magnificently located just on the banks, and each of the bungalows, the tented bungalows, have access to the river and wonderful views of it. Baobab Hill House is situated, which was the sort of center of village life in the times of the Makuleke people. They had their main village in the area where Baobab Hill House stands. Also a wonderful place to relax. And the Outpost is perched high up on a cliff overlooking the Luvuvu River with magnificent views over towards the Sandparks area. The Eco Training Camp is a little bit more rustic, landscaping by elephants who roam regularly through there. But we thoroughly enjoyed our stay there. This is the sort of general eating area, briefing room, place to relax. In the background, you can see Margie talking to Ross Hawkins, and the guy with the beard where Margie's talking to is Bruce Lawson, whose father is the well-known Peter Lawson from Peter Lawson Safaris. And Bruce was there with our first visit to Makuleke, and has sadly emigrated to Australia since. He's a delightful guy. He's a loss. These are the sleeping tents. Fairly basic, but there is an ensuite shower and toilet. You do get mosquito nets. They're not shown in this thing. But be warned, there's no electricity and no cell phone reception at all in the camp. One can occasionally scrounge a charging point to recharge your cell phones, but certainly you will need to take your own torches and lights. The other options related to the Pafuri border post, the old Wenela buildings, are outside the Makuleke Park, within sandparks, and one can book these through sandparks. There's Mockford House and Cottage, and there's also the Doctor's House. This is Mockford Cottage, photo taken by Joy Fish when she visited there with Johan some time back. So that's all from us. Thank you very much.